Welcome to the Engaging People podcast. I'm your host, Cecily Jorgensen, and today you get to hear from our DecisionWise consultants on stress in the workplace. If you've listened to our previous podcasts or read our blogs, you may know that we started these roundtable discussions to address our clients' top concerns post-employee engagement survey. And so their number one concern was growth, number two was top-down communication, third was employee voice, and now we have stress at number 4. So this leads us to ask our consultants questions like, why do companies still struggle with stress? How does it show up in the workplace? And how do people and companies work through such a persistent issue? Principal consultant Beth Wilkins starts the conversation with a surprising statistic.
So as we look at our data from 2015 to 2018, we only have 65% favorability on the level of stress in my job is manageable. So this is a pervasive problem that we see across our clients. And I see that a lot of executives I talk to feel like, well, it's just that time. We're trying to do more with less. Everybody is. And I think they're trying to get as much from their employees as possible because that's profitable for them, right? But once employees start feeling put upon, that the weight is so heavy, it becomes more of a transactional relationship where they start to feel a little bit of a grudge and they're not as engaged in their work. So we talk about engagement as wanting to give discretionary effort. When you're in this state of feeling like you're being put upon, you're not wanting to give back, right? You feel like they're taking so much from you, you don't want to give back. And so I had a conversation with an executive this week, actually, where he was talking about not wanting to focus on that score and that area because he didn't know how much he could do about it. And I get that there are times when you can't alleviate the stress right away, but I think sweeping it under the carpet is not going to help. That you have to acknowledge that you've heard people, you understand what they're feeling, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There's some way that you're going to get through this busy period, that you want to work with them to understand how to solve this problem. And if executives don't tackle that, then they're going to lose the trust and engagement of their employees. And I worry about this especially with all the talk of a recession, because if employees are already feeling this consistently, what's it going to be like when there's a recession? We'll probably see even more of it.
So the data is telling us that people are pretty stressed at work, but what does this mean for certain industries and how does the problem manifest and affect employee engagement? Principal consultant Dan Hoops and senior consultant Charles Rogel share these observations.
So one of the patterns that I'm noticing is for the healthcare organizations that I work with, there's always a tremendous amount of stress and workload. And there are a couple interesting things that happen. One is when you look at their direct report ratio, it could be as high as one manager to, in some cases, 80 to 100 direct reports. It's like, well, man, how do you manage that stress of all of the input and while trying to be a leader over 100 direct reports? And it was really insightful. They said, we went into a meeting the other day and our senior leaders came in and they were telling us, well, we have X amount of requisitions that are open. And the nurses said, I don't care how many recs you have open. I need you to fill the positions. They were so maxed and so stressed that the impact it was having on them was ultimately in the patient care. And, we often talk in business, here's what I'm doing. But ultimately, relieving that stress has to come to the root cause of what's creating it. And so people are talking and telling about not only the impact on their own personal quality of work, but in healthcare, you don't want to have a negative patient interaction. If somebody's life's dependent on it because they're having the employee may be having a bad day.
A couple of things that that I check on when I see low scores around stress in an organization. Typically it means people are busy, workload's high, but it also starts to impact the amount of growth that they experience in their job. So then they're less likely to attend a training or to take on another project that might expand their capabilities. And so the opportunities they have to grow and learn new things, add bullet points to their resume, starts to decrease because they're just turning over or churning so hard to try to get things done in their area of responsibility. It also has an impact on the amount of kind of creativity that people have. And so they stop trying to innovate. They don't have time to really fix broken processes in the organization. They don't have time to think about better ways of doing things because they have to follow the same procedures and get things off their desk as quick as they can, that they just can't sit back and try to fix something. So there's less innovation, there's less fixing of the problems, and more of just trying to get things done. A third thing sometimes that we see is a fear of speaking up. And so another question we ask is around this ability to speak up and share opinions about what you see going on in the organization. So if people feel stifled, if there's kind of a culture of fear there about speaking up, that can lead to stress as well because they can't voice their concerns, there's no outlet, and they get frustrated.
In our next portion of the conversation, we asked our team to share some common triggers of stress. Consultant Stephen Mickelson has seen many companies struggle with stress as they experience growing pains.
Growth is a wonderful thing to have. It means your business is successful, you're making money, you're expanding to meet all of your customers' needs, and that's fantastic. But it does add a lot of additional work to your employees, which can then in turn create some stress for them. And you can see this in different populations throughout those organizations too. For example, if an organization is growing really quickly, sometimes their managers feel really stressed out because their teams are growing so rapidly. They've got really young tenure. They're having a hard time training their employees coming up. So that can be one of the great problems to have as an organization, but it can contribute to that stress.
Dan Hoops then points out that stress is often caused by misalignment between one's goals and the company's, or the expectations between manager and direct report.
If I go back to the engagement model, and I feel like I'm not having the impact that I should be having because I'm pulled in so many different directions, and I'm not clear that I'm creating the outcomes that I want, and I'm sub-optimizing my efforts. For me, I go back to, well, what am I responsible for achieving? And for me, it's frequently a misalignment around my priorities and when I'm spending my time, but more importantly, what I'm not going to do, or what can I delegate to somebody else to do. And I find if I get wrapped up in, I've got so much to do, and it's like, well, what's out of alignment? And how do we resolve that? I remember having a conversation with a manager one time, and he's like, well, you're not getting the stuff done. So I went onto my whiteboard and I literally wrote 21 projects that had been loaded on my plate. And my boss came in the next day and I opened up my whiteboard and I had the 21 projects that on the board and I said, here's what's on my plate. Where do you want me to focus my energy? Because there's no way I can get 21 things done. So since I'm focusing on all of the 21, I'm not getting as much done on a few. So help me make the decision. What was really interesting is I had this conversation. He's like, wow, I didn't know that was all that's on your plate. I'm like, well, those are all the things that you told me that I was responsible for. And it created a really healthy conversation around the prioritization of work, the allocation of resources, but ultimately tying back into the higher level of engagement on, am I having an impact? And am I really making a difference?
Many leaders don't consider how closely their employees follow the state of the company. People have their eyes on things like employees being let go or hired, the number of new customers and retained customers, and revenue numbers. They might also look for other indications of the company's overall health. These fluctuations can definitely cause stress for employees who stay in tune with the company. Consultant Thomas Olson shares how one CEO's communication skills helped ease the minds of his company.
So I think one of the things about stress is, there's the stress in your everyday job and with your manager, but there's also the stress of how are we doing as an organization, and that's something I've seen in the past a couple of different companies that I've worked with where, one company was struggling a little bit and there wasn't any transparency from senior leaders. So I think if you look at, how are we doing as a company? How are senior leaders communicating? So questions around communication and around company strategy, that can really affect someone's stress level. It's not necessarily affecting their day-to-day job, but it's affecting how they feel about the company and how they feel about, where are we going? A different company that I worked with, there was a lot more transparency. So every week there was a weekly meeting with the CEO. It was a high growth company, but there would be a lot of transparency. There would be a lot of, we know these things we need to fix these things, and here's what we're working on doing about them right now. So, the senior leadership was just very transparent and very, willing to share what they were working on at the moment, where this other company just didn't have that sort of culture. And I think that really affected everybody that worked there, because there was this stress of not knowing, are we going to be around next quarter? Are we growing? Does this mean, is my job going to be around? So I think it's interesting to look at some of these stress questions and then look at some of those larger organizational questions as well.
And now we get to the fun part, how to actually work through those stressful times at work, because chances are they aren't going away. Charles Rogel shares how he looks at survey results with clients and what low scores around stress might mean.
So typically when we see low scores around stress, the scores around workload or measuring workload are low. So then we'll look at things like tools and resources, like Steve mentioned, as well as maybe training to do your job. Sometimes we'll try to understand, is this just temporary? Is it because we're in a high growth mode, or because we're trying to get a shipment out the door for a big customer? And so usually when we explore the topic of stress with an organization, when it comes up, no one's really surprised by seeing a low score in that area. Sometimes they're concerned because it does appear in maybe a certain department. So if your developers or engineering department is scoring really low around stress, that could be that could impact deadlines and deliverables they have, as well as their own engagement and likelihood to stay with the organization.
Beth Wilkins also reminds us that not all employees feel the stress equally. Some carry way more burdens, especially if they are key influencers.
If you looked at a social network map, you'd find these are the hubs. People internally and externally are going to them for information or advice. So if you lose those people, obviously it takes a big toll on the whole organization, on your productivity, your communication. And so I think we need to be looking at who in particular is stressed. And one of the ways we do that at DecisionWise is through org network analysis. And then we can help coach those people to delegate more effectively, to figure out what the priorities are, to negotiate deadlines, things like that, so they can manage the stress and not burn out.
While organizations need to help employees manage stress with adjustments to the employee experience, employees also shouldn't wait for the organization to come to them with solutions. Stephen Mickelson shares his thoughts on working through stress with your manager.
It's super easy to get stressed out, and I think that everybody needs to learn how to manage their own stress. There are certain things organizations can do for that, but stress is kind of inevitable. If you're an adult with responsibilities, it's just bound to happen. But one of the conversations I've had with my supervisor over the last 6 months, I was going through a period of time when stress was pretty high. I just approached him and I asked, hey, to help me manage the stress a little bit better, can I take off for an hour and a half, 2 hours in the middle of the day, go do a stress relief activity for me? That's going to the gym and exercising really, really helps manage my stress. And he was extremely supportive of it and let me take off in the middle of the day, even though that's a little bit unusual for our work culture. And I come back after my session and I get back to the grindstone and get the rest done that I need to for the day. And that's been really helpful for stress management for me.
Dan Hoop shares how stress contributed to his career growth, but that a leader's touch was needed to help him see the light at the end of the tunnel.
When I was asked to be on the merger and acquisition team, specifically due diligence within the HR realm, I didn't even know what due diligence was. And I remember having this conversation with my wife, it's like, with my boss, oh, well, what does due diligence mean? And he kind of laughed and he says, well, here's what it means. Well, we got into this project and we're doing the actuarial work, and we had made an error with the consulting company that we were using, so we had to go back and do an entire recalculation to send back to the board of directors for this company. There was so much stress in my life at that time because I was doing stuff that I had no idea how to do, it literally made me physically ill. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. But when I began to realize, hey, this is an opportunity from a growth standpoint that you'll probably have once in your career, this intense of a learning experience. Take advantage of that. I was in grad school at the time, so I could tie it directly back into my learning. But then I knew, okay, if I can get through this, I know we're going to acquire the company, I know we're going to become a wholly owned subsidiary, and I know that we're going to get ready for an IPO. So having that light at the end of the tunnel, tied with a very intense growth experience, literally became one of those defining experiences in my OD career that I've been able to use. And I think that's very similar with other employees. If they can have light at the end of the tunnel, as Beth said, and tied into growth experience, as Stephen said, that gives purpose to the stress instead of just the stress and the workload by itself.
Thomas follows up with his own ideas and experiences from his time as a supervisor.
I remember a time when I was managing 4 employees in a retail store, and I think it really came down to some of the stress that they had came down to this question where they didn't necessarily feel like they had the right training, and so me as a supervisor, it was my responsibility to make sure that they were trained, that they felt like they could do the job well. And I think anytime you don't feel like you know what you're doing, there's stress, right? There's this inherent stress because you don't feel confident. And so training these employees almost from scratch and just giving them some of the tools and resources that they needed just kind of changed their engagement and the way that they interacted with customers, with me, and I saw a big change in our numbers, in our sales numbers, because all of a sudden they felt like they knew what they were doing. And to tag on to that, another part of their stress was just their weekly schedule. So these are people that are not all working full time, but they have other things going on in their lives. Sometimes they're working another job. And so as a supervisor, I think you have to be aware of just people's lives outside of work. Are you scheduling, the right hours? Is that something that contributes to their stress? And for them, it was something that, they felt like they didn't have any input in their schedules. And when I started giving them input and kind of making sure that they had the right hours that they wanted, that part of their, that stress for them was gone as well, because now they felt like they had more control over their day and their week and their month. So it was just a very little thing as a supervisor or manager that I changed, but made a huge difference on the employees.
If managers can help their employees feel better about life, their chances to fully engage increase. And engagement is driven by employees having meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection in their jobs. Stephen makes a very astute observation about workload scores and meaning scores.
I've heard it said that people don't get burnt out because of what they do, they get burnt out because of why they do it. So another great thing to analyze from employee survey results is if you start to notice workload scores becoming really unfavorable, also couple that with some of the meaning items on the survey. We typically have items that ask things like, my job provides me with a sense of meaning and purpose. And it should be a really big red flag if you start to see really unfavorable workload scores, but also really unfavorable meaning scores there. So that meaning and purpose in the job role can help provide that why to the intense amount of work that employees sometimes have to do.
Up to this point, we've done a pretty good job making stress out to be the bad guy, but some stress is actually good for people. Charles Rogel points out that we have to find that happy balance for good stress and burnout.
Thinking about stress, the way we measure it when we're working with clients is asking a question that says, the level of stress in my job is manageable. Now, it's interesting because some people will answer that and say, well, I kind of control the level of stress that I feel and I manage it, and even though I might have a high workload, I'm able to manage my stress and my workload appropriately. Other people don't feel that way. Maybe they don't feel as empowered to manage their workload or stress or other things that are kind of thrown at them. So stress, though, in essence, is a good thing too. So there's two kind of terms for stress. One is the stress that we typically associate with the bad type of stress that causes high blood pressure and anxiety and all those other kind of things. And there's eustress, which is kind of the good stress or tension that you feel when you're trying to accomplish something or grow, or you're working on something that's challenging. And so sometimes when I'm looking at the results for the question around measuring the level of stress in an organization, you don't want to see it score too high because then people aren't feeling maybe challenged enough. But you definitely don't want to score too low because too much stress can lead to burnout, and that's a definite killer of employee engagement.
Beth shares how finding purpose in stressful situations has helped her stay engaged and accomplish her goals in life.
When I talk to clients about this, one of the things I talk about is purpose. So the individual purpose, like Dan was just talking about, but is there an organizational purpose that employees can really get behind? If you have a compelling enough vision of where you're going, it's amazing what people will sacrifice. And it doesn't feel as much like stress because they care so much about accomplishing that purpose. So I remember when I was working at Oracle and doing a PhD at the same time, I had this goal of designing a transformational executive program. And I was working with the University of Michigan and the key thought leaders on positive organizational change. And even though it was really hard, I was working every waking moment, I was so interested in what I was doing. I could see the difference it was making to these individuals' lives. And so it didn't seem like as big of a burden. I mean, I still felt tired and things like that, but I loved what I was doing. I was passionate about what I was doing and about the purpose that we were trying to accomplish.
As our discussion started to wind down, we asked our consultants how they coach their clients on stress. Charles shares how he had to coach an organization through department troubles.
So I think about it kind of at three levels. One is the executive level, the middle, or the second would be middle level managers, and the third would be frontline managers working with employees. And I guess the fourth would be how you manage your own stress as an individual. But some of the things we've mentioned already around what senior leaders can do, executive leaders, is kind of painting a clear picture of the strategy of the organization, the game plan to kind of achieve success this year, a compelling reason or vision for the organization, because simply saying, hey, we want to boost revenue by a certain percent isn't very inspiring to employees, doesn't give them something to kind of rally behind and be passionate about. So just making sure you kind of have your act together as an executive team and are really communicating that well and painting a real compelling picture. For mid-level managers, it's more about trying to get out of the way, or at least remove obstacles that employees are running into. So kind of working with one organization, we had two kind of department heads that had different kind of procedures for their employees. Even though the departments worked together, the one delivered services to the other, and this was around loan processing in a credit union. The department leaders had different philosophies about how that should be done, how loans should be approved, what a mistake or an error was on a loan application, and who should address it. And so it created a lot of tension and friction between the employees, and a lot of stress because it caused extra work and different expectations. So the department leaders really needed to get together and fix the problem and come up with a clear kind of expectations for both groups to use to really make the work less stressful for their employees. And then finally, for frontline managers, it's really about having those individual conversations, those one-on-ones with your employees, and understanding where their stress is coming from. It's very unique for individuals. They need to feel like they're being heard, that you're kind of able to maybe make some customized or unique accommodations for them to handle their workload and stress, like we've talked about already. And then as an individual, for me, it's about kind of stepping back, being able to kind of look at my schedule, looking at what's on my plate, prioritizing, taking some time to kind of get out of the moment and the stress that you're feeling, and understanding where it's coming from, what the outcome is. I heard recently one good bit of advice, which was, so if you're staying up at night, laying awake and stressing about something that you might not be able to control. So maybe there's a recession coming and you're worried about your job. So think through that. Go through these steps and think through, okay, what would happen if there was a recession? What would happen if I lost my job? What would I end up doing thereafter? And so as you are able to play through the scenario in your mind, all of a sudden the fear and the anxiety behind that thought really dissipates, because you've kind of gone through it, you've challenged it, and so now it's not such a stressor that's keeping you up at night.
Beth is an incredible executive coach, and so she shared advice she gives managers on their one-on-one coaching.
So some of the things I tell clients are to work with their managers. Charles already addressed this. Maybe a couple things I'd add would be to help them be good coaches, because I agree with what so many have said. You need to have those one-on-one conversations with them and figure out what is stressful to them. How can you give them more meaningful work? How can you give them accommodations so that they can make it through tough periods? All of that. But then also helping them think through what the priorities are. As Dan said, it's an organization's obligation to help them understand what those priorities are. And it's the employee's obligation to tell the employer if they can't meet all of the requirements being put upon them. It needs to be a dialogue. So once you start that dialogue, you can think about, all right, so what is feasible? What can we accomplish in what timeline? And how do I, as the manager, go to upper management and push back on certain things, or help them reframe the expectations, create more reasonable expectations. Another thing I recommend is that you have fun. So even in a stressful time, you can take time out to do something fun with your colleagues, or you can just joke around with your colleagues, or have lunch together or something. But when you have relationships with people, even if it's hard, you feel like, I enjoy the people I'm with. I know they have my back. I know they'll help me through this problem, all of those things. And then the last thing I would say is, really, as a senior leader, you need to think strategically about where stress is greatest. So again, analyze where the bottlenecks are, see if those people are really key people in your organization, because then that is an urgent need. You need to work with those people and help manage their stress.
Dan Hoops likes to take a more reflective approach with these questions.
Philosophically, I agree with a quote that I heard from a leader. It says, if you are on the right path, it will always be uphill. When I think of stress, it can stretch us, it can challenge us. And we all want to be invigorated in our career. We don't want to become stagnant. And part of that, is, by definition, is going uphill and rather than plateauing from our contribution standpoint. But it's also important to understand if I'm getting off the path, or if the path is just unbearable. And what are my resources around me? One of the best ways that I found to manage kind of that stress load when I'm working with clients is to ask them two questions. One is, are you okay with the level of response? Versus my overlay of a judgment of, 65 is really a low score. And some organizations will say, yeah, we're okay with that. And other organizations will say, no, we're not. So for me, it's important to calibrate where they are with that. The second question that I'm typically asking them is, what are the internal resources and support mechanisms to help individuals that have that high level of stress in their job? And how can they make it manageable? Because we know that if we're on this uphill trajectory, as that quote said, we know that we need resources around us. We know that we need an infrastructure that supports us. And we need to understand we're on the path. How do I keep on that path so I don't get derailed and ultimately fall off that path?
While these suggestions may work for many organizations, Stephen adds that other organizations have very diverse job types within their organization, adding an extra element of stress.
We've talked a little bit about helping employees kind of endure the stress and intense times of workload by finding meaning and growth opportunities from their job roles. And it is important to remember that for some of your job types and functions in your organization, that might be outside of your organization. So, for example, if you're a restaurant chain, you might have a lot of employees who are coming in. This is their first time in the kitchen as a chef. This is what they want to do for the rest of their life. And so it's really easy for them to find meaning in their job role because it's what they're passionate about. However, you also have employees such as wait staff who probably don't plan on being waiters or waitresses for the rest of their lives. But you as a manager can help them connect the dots between, even though this isn't your long-term plan, this is setting you up for success for that long-term plan. This is helping you get through college, for example, or it's helping you while you're between jobs or looking for something else. And so helping them find that meaning or how it enables growth outside of work is also a thing we would recommend doing.
Thank you for listening to the Engaging People podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode on managing stress at work. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to know if you are enjoying the content, so please leave a comment and a review. Also visit DecisionWise.com for more articles, case studies, and videos on this topic and more. While you are there, if you are interested in learning more about our employee engagement surveys and 360-degree feedback assessments, or working with one of our consultants, fill out the contact form and a representative will be in touch. Our next roundtable discussion will be on supervisors. So until next time, please enjoy our other content published daily on our website and social media.